Thank you. Hi, I'm Galina, Chairman, Harrison Public Library Director, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to our fantastic authors event here that we are hosting together, Harrison Public Library and Book Yaya. And now I would like to welcome DeLauné Michel from Book Yaya, who will introduce our guests today.
Thank you so much, Galina. I'm DeLaune. I am so thrilled that we are all here tonight to hear Melissa Clark and Bill Buford talk about Bill's amazing new book. Some of y'all have been here when Melissa came with her last book, Dinner in French, Recipes by Way of France. Melissa has written over 38 cookbooks. She also wrote Kid in the Kitchen, which she was here with in December. That was her latest. Melissa is a staff writer for the New York Times food section, where she writes their wildly popular food column, A Good Appetite. The winner of multiple James Beards and IACP awards, Melissa is the host on the Weeknight Kitchen podcast on the Splendid Table and has appeared on Iron John. Melissa earned an MFA in writing from Columbia, and her work has been selected for the Best American Food Writing. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband and daughter, and she is here tonight to speak with Bill about his incredible book, Dirt. Bill Buford is the author of Heat and Among the Thugs. He has received a Marshall Scholarship, a James Beard Award, and the Commune de Roma's Premio Sandro Onofri for narrative reporting. For 18 years, Buford lived in England and was the founding editor of the literary magazine Granta and the founding publisher of Granta Books. He moved to the United States in 1995 to join The New Yorker, where he has been the fiction editor, a staff writer, and a regular contributor. In 2008, he moved with his family to Lyon, France, and lived there for 5 years, which is in this book that you have to read. He was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, educated at the University of California, Berkeley, and King's College, Cambridge, and now lives in New York City with his wife, the wine educator and writer Jessica Green, and their two darling twin sons, whom you will fall in love with after you read this book. Please help me welcome Bill Buford, who will read part of Dirt from us tonight before he visits with Melissa. Bill Buford.
Thank you. What a great introduction. I haven't done many readings because this book, everything was closing down. But one thing was always kind of vivid in my mind, which was when I finally get a job in a kitchen. And if you haven't read the book, there's a long thing about my wanting to go to France, and finally I go to France, and we do go to France officially, and we get official visas, and we even get an apartment, and we get the boys in school, and then Jessica goes out and gets, my wife, she gets our IKEA furniture and furnishes our apartment, and then gets the home already, and I'm coming over later with the boys because I think it'd be too stressful for her to fly with them, and then I miss the flight, and then I break my computer, and then I get ill, and then I arrive with both boys who have thrown up all over my lap, and it's a rough start, and it becomes rougher when I have a very hard time getting into a kitchen, because the idea is I want to work in a French kitchen and learn how to cook French. And I finally get into a very distinguished place called La Mer Brazier, and it's my first day there. I have to get into La Mer Brazier, I had to go to cooking school, so I went to cooking school, and I finally come back. I'd asked to go there before and I was rejected, and I come back and I've got this cooking school experience under my belt, and I'm shown into the kitchens, and I'm introduced to Sylvain, and Sylvain is the cuisinier. He's not really the sous chef, but he's kind of like a sous chef, and we start making food together, and he's unlike any person I've ever met in my life before in the kitchen. He smiles, he's friendly, he's encouraging. He talks about trips that we will take with our wives. He wants to take me to Burgundy, and we're making a chicken dish involving foie gras and gelatin, and it's like I've arrived. Then he says, "Okay, now let's go do the artichokes." And until this moment, I was feeling quite insecure, but I have experience in Italian kitchens, and in Italian kitchens, they use a lot of artichokes. And so I thought, oh, great. I thought I'd read from this, because as I say at this point in the book, I said, at least I knew how to prepare an artichoke. And this finally was a relief. Artichokes are Italian. Artichokes weren't new to me. Sylvain was astonished. Really? you can turn an artichoke. You mean cut away the leaves and carve out the heart? Yes, you can do that. Well, yes. C'est vrai? Yes, really. I wasn't trying to prove that I was more than a novice. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I had worked in Italian restaurants. At Institut Bocuse, I actually had asked for an artichoke lesson just to confirm that I was basically doing the right thing. Artichokes are important in Lyon. I'd learned that early on. Sylvain conveyed that he was very impressed in that exaggerated theatrical way of a grown-up talking to a toddler, and said something about my being more schooled than he'd realized. He was showing me no respect, and he was showing me no question, and immediate new respect. This made me uneasy. He set up an impromptu artichoke station. He took a plastic bottle from a shelf above the sink, citric acid powder, and shook some of it into a large bowl of water. The citric acid keeps the artichokes from browning. Then he pulled a street-sized trash can next to our workshop that you end up jettisoning just to get down to the vegetable's small and tender heart. Does no one dip them in butter and scrape them off with their teeth? I fetched a cart. We got to work. I can't remember what I did. If I try to conjure up my effort, an image comes to mind, but it is of a perfectly turned artichoke, 2 to 3 inches of stem, gently curved, the heart smoothly symmetrical, looking like a flower. I generally felt that I had achieved what I had intended to do. I hadn't known that it was a failure until I showed it to Sylvain. What I did at the time was this. I made him cry. What I presented evidently was so mutated looking that Sylvain burst out laughing at it and me. He laughed so hard that tears ran down his cheeks. He laughed so hard that he buckled over. Everyone in the kitchen then stopped their tasks and started laughing too, weakly at first, because unstoppable laughter is always contagious, even if you don't know why, until you then discover why, and with your funny bones suitably warmed up, you too break out into laughter, pointing at the offending object and at the person who made it. Eventually, Sylvain threw my artichoke emphatically into the trash and said, with difficulty, because he was still laughing, that perhaps I wasn't quite ready for turning artichokes. Only one person wasn't laughing. This was Christophe Hubert. Hubert was the executive chef. He had crossed his arms across his chest. He stared out with displeasure. Christophe continued staring until, one by one, each member of the kitchen slowly brought his laughter under control. In truth, I was to blame. I knew this and suspected that Christophe was thinking the same. If I hadn't been there with all my dysfunction, no one in his kitchen would have started falling about in hysterics. The room quieted down. People resumed their duties. Christophe waited another moment, a long moment. Merci, he said, with exaggerated gratitude. That was day one in the kitchen.
That was fabulous. Melissa, I'm going to let you jump in and visit with Bill. And Bill, thank you so much for that wonderful peek into your book.
So that, I love that part. As soon as you said artichokes, and I think that's actually a perfect place to start, because I mean, so much of the book is about that I see is this at least at the beginning, it's this tension between your love of Italy and your discovery of France, right? And so I would love to just
yes, yeah.
And I would just love to, so, first questions first. So you've already, you've lived in Italy, right? You've spent a lot of time there. You've worked in Italian kitchens. You worked at in Babbo. What made you decide that you needed to learn French food?
Ooh. Well, two things. One, I wrote about the experience of working at Babbo, working on the line, going to Italy, making pasta, becoming an Italian butcher, and thought, I've learned some chops. I can sort of hold my own in a kitchen. Two things, having achieved that, two things were kind of nagging at me. One was that there's generally a universal belief that if you really want to know how to cook in a kitchen, you got to do French. And so Italian was fine, but Italian is like pasta. There was just, it was like, that was like the next thing to do. And the other one was a thing that I'd really fallen for, which is the Italians believe they invented French cuisine. I mean, they really believed it. I mean, the first time I heard it, I mean, I heard it a number of times, but the first time I thought, yeah. And the second time I heard it in a butcher shop where I was working, I went, oh, yeah. And they all went, no, we did. And they went, the Medici and the Renaissance canard, duck orange and the artichoke and asparagus, they all came from Italy. And eventually I looked into it and, well, actually quite seriously looked into it. And I realized that at the heart of the Italian premise is that cooking during the Renaissance was actually one of the Renaissance arts. And it's seldom regarded as a Renaissance art. You think of sculpture, you think of painting, you think of design, you think of architecture. But at the same time that you're flourishing, there was a kind of fabulous flourishing in the kitchen. And with a lot of invention, a lot of ambition, and a kind of command of the kitchen arts. And that preceded the French having that similar kind of command. So that was kind of nagging at in my mind as well, is that France is kind of, to complete this journey that I embarked on in Italy, I needed to go to France. And then I put it off for many years because the whole idea of going to France was just so freaking intimidating. I just kept putting it off and putting it off.
So yeah, language is part of the problem, right?
Language is part of the problem.
Right, and eventually.
Probably the bigger part of the problem is just getting there. And the other part of the problem is French people, and especially the French chefs. I mean, there's this, if you ever see, I mean, just looking, you see a French chef. The French chef is a he, usually. It's now more often a she than it has ever been before. But even the she's will the posture of the he's, which is they're like this. Any French chef, they're like this. They're basically saying, I'm defended against you. I'm not going to be. They're the opposite of Sylvain. They don't smile. They're haughty. They're standing up straight, and they're saying, you're not important to me. And I found them so just inaccessible. And the kitchen itself was so inaccessible. I remember looking at some how-to book that Dorothy Hamilton gave it to me, just like what you learned for your basic French cooking, and just went through pages and pages and pages and pages, and thought, what, I really think I'm going to learn this? This is ridiculous. And I think probably the reason I went was because Jessica, my wife, got fed up with my doing other things, that like writing for the New Yorker about oysters or chocolate or something like that. It was chocolate was the big one. Disappeared into the jungle for a long time. And she just like, get out, go do this.
So, okay. So you just did like the imitation of the French chef. Can you do, the French chef, can you do the Italian chef for us? Let's say, how would you compare and contrast them? Like, what is so different, You can explain it in words. You don't need to do physical, but I mean, just like,
the Italian chef, like one day when I was working in La Marbresier with Christophe again, I think my apron had come loose. And he said, qu'est-ce que tu fais? You're like an Italian chef. Like, with your toga's going to tip down the side. And you got all the stuff thrown over your shoulder, and all the stuff, you got mess all in front of your hands are all greasy, and you do everything with your hands. And it was like, basically, we are French chefs and we are orderly and we're cleaning. They're Italian chefs and they're just like pig pens. And that is definitely the view.
That's the French view. What's your view, though?
Say again?
I said, okay, that's the French view of the Italians, but what do you think? Like, how would you, do you think there's obviously a grain of truth in that, but how would you just like describe, how would you describe the two different experiences from your point of view? You've worked in Italian kitchens, you've worked in French kitchens. Where's your heart? Oh,
my heart's completely divided now. It's completely split. But I also think, the French and Italians, they're spiritual, intellectual, and culinary cousins, and they're they're effectively joined at the hip. That hip may turn out to be, might be able to describe it as the Alps. And they've been joined at the hip for a very, very, very long time. I think the French kitchen, it has an orderliness that France didn't have, that it eventually had as it went through its own Renaissance and Reformation and became a much more codified culture. It has an order that I began to appreciate when my son George took up ballet. He wanted to do hip hop when we were living in Lyon, and I said, "Yeah, you can do hip hop." I didn't want to do like a babysitting thing of taking him to hip hop, but said, "Take dance seriously and do classical as well." And he became very accomplished at ballet and was pre-professional with the American Ballet Theater. And I used to go to his they'd let the parents into a class once every 6 months, and I realized ballet is organized just like the French kitchen, and everything's got a name, and there's an order. And in fact, there's a lot of words from the French kitchen, like plié, which are a lot of the same vocabulary. And there's a lot of that vocabulary goes back to the military, and the brigade system owes its origins to the military. And there's a real powerful sensibility in France of order, with a name for lots of things. I mean, I'm going off in a very eccentric place, and it can be called to account for utterly and easily. But if Italy represents disorder, the French in some ways represent the fear of disorder. Mm. And the kitchen was definitely the fear of disorder. But there was a beauty in it, and there's a beauty finally in knowing that there's a word for everything, and there's a way for doing everything. And in France, it's not like it comes out of a fascist brain necessarily. It really comes out of this need for order and 4 centuries of cooking, where everybody's examining over and over again how to do an onion, and the best way of doing an onion, and the best way of doing a shallot, and that there's always going to be many ways of doing lots of things, so when the potato, I'm going off in tangents here, but when the potato finally got accepted as an edible food in France, which was late, it was around the time of the Revolution, they immediately came up with the 100 ways to cook a potato. Just like they have 100 ways to cook an egg, and they have all these codified ways of doing everything. And there's a real beauty to the French kitchen. My experience is cooking, say, at Babbo, it's like madness, just all, it's pressure, stress, slop. Everybody's hands are dirty. You got to dip them into something to clean them to be able to make. When I finally was working on the line in a French kitchen, I thought, wow, it gets busy, and you got to keep a lot of things in your head. But there was an order to it, because actually most of the work you've done before you even start, and there's a beauty to that. I mean, you know that. I mean, you know where you are in the French kitchen.
Right. Yeah. But it's also, on the flip side, you also talk about, the fear. There's so much fear. Did you feel that same kind of fear in Italian kitchens? You talk a lot about just being, and even your artichoke, what you just read, that there was this pressure and this fear.
I think there's fear in any kitchen, frankly. I think anytime you're cooking, you're cooking for, if you're in a kitchen, it's more of a performance than it is when you're cooking at home. And there's always an element of fear of failure, fear of rejection.
Yeah.
The French kitchen, you're definitely being watched in the French kitchen. And that is maybe an element of fear, and it is also can be very thuggish, and that is an element of fear. But the main thing in a French kitchen is you're always being watched, and anything you're doing is always going to be spotted.
Okay, so someone is asking how long you lasted in a French kitchen, and it's from the way you're talking, it seems short, but it was a long time, right? And also talk about, not just in France. You worked for Michel Richard in DC. You worked in 2 restaurants in France. So all told, how long were you in French kitchens?
I I don't know. Michel Richard about 6 months. Institut Picou's 3 or 4 months. La Mère Brazier 6 months, and then I did little things. I did things at a Bouchon. Did a couple things in a place up in the Alps that I didn't write about. I was actually set up to do a stage a couple years.
Right. Well, and also with cooking school too, right? That was another. How long was the cooking school program?
The cooking school program is normally I guess it's a 3-year program. But a big part of the program is you do what they call a stage. You become a stagiaire.
Right.
It's basically an apprenticeship. And you have to do 3 of those. And then your cooking program is theory and cooking, practical. And so I just did only practical courses. And that was 3 or 4 months.
Right.
All practical, just and practical. And then basically I ended up.
I think we're losing you. Yeah, we're losing you, Bill. We lost you for a second. Can you just, you were just saying that it was 3 to 4 months, and I'm worried that you have slow internet. I'm worried I'm going to get slow internet because we live around the corner from each other. I'm like, uh-oh. Oh no, you're stuck. I see your face. Okay, well, I know you're going to come back to us in 2 seconds, but let me see. So in the next, I guess people write in some questions. We can talk about, I can answer some questions about Bill's book, which is really wonderful, and you all should read it. A lot of it has to do, a lot of the book has to do with his family. And as DeLauné mentioned, his charming children. So you really learn, I mean, what I loved so much about the book was the way that it wasn't just about the analysis of the food, but it was also about the story of his, I mean, it is a memoir about his family experience living there. And it's very much about how he acclimated and his family acclimated culturally. And one of my favorite little anecdotes that I'm going to tell, I hope Bill isn't going to kill me for this, but I'm going to tell it anyway, from the book, is when they come, so they spend 5 years in Lyon, and the boys, I think they go when they're around 3. Mm-hmm. So they come back, they're about 8, and they speak French fluently, of course. And when they finally get, and there's a point where Bill and his wife Jessica are thinking, all right, well, we're either going to stay here or we have to get back, because the boys are actually they're losing their English. So this is important. So they decide they're going to move back, and it happens kind of all of a sudden. And the way that they moved there was also very all of a sudden. I imagine the household being like, not spontaneous, but just like that. To be able to move that quickly shows amazing determination and planning.
Right. And they didn't tell their friends, Melissa, until 2 weeks before, or their family until 2 weeks before they left. So it was quick and stealthy. So go ahead. Sorry.
And I think it was the same on the way when they were leaving too.
Right.
So they get back to New York, and the boys have a play date, and oh God, the descriptions of what the boys ate in their French nursery school is incredible. Like, they had a whole menu, they had courses. There you are, Bill. I'm just talking about your family.
I was going to send you a chat message saying, I'm back. I'm really sorry.
No, that's fine. Did you hear what I was saying?
I did. I liked it. I didn't want to interrupt.
Well, I was just going to tell the story about about the cold pizza when the boys got back. You should tell that.
Oh, yes. We'd return, and we had kind of a double date with a couple who visited us in Lyon, and we were going to take them to eat at Daniel Boulou, and we dropped off our boys to be with their twin boys, and they had a nanny. And by the time we got there, the boys had already, their host had already eaten, and my children were really confused. And they found that there was some pizza on the counter, which was for them. And they sat at the counter, and I saw them as I was leaving. They were really miserable eating this pizza by themselves, not knowing why they weren't surrounded by other people. picked them in the evening later. Frederick said, that
Oh, you're the punchline. The punchline. What's the punchline? What did Frederick say?
that's when I picked up Frederick at the end, and this internet trouble. I'm gonna ask the family if they can
Stop streaming those movies, kids.
Yeah, I'm really sorry for this. As it happens, I mean, I was ordering a new modem today, which is I had to create a new apartment so that we could have a new second modem. I'm really sorry. I'm just gonna ask everyone to shut up what they can. Then
tell everybody to get off. I know you just,
yeah.
Bill moved around the corner from me, so, which is very exciting.
That's true.
I know, it is true. But then I want to know what Frederick said. And can I just tell you when I read that, so I mean, Frederick said something to you, you'll correct me, but something to the effect of that wasn't really like a proper dinner. How could they serve that for dinner? And I'm just thinking, how many times have I had a play date with my daughter and her friends when I've gone out to dinner with the parents and I've ordered in pizza. And so I was like, there was this pang there of like, oh God, very familiar.
It was pizza's a really fine meal. And it's and everybody lives on it. But there was something about it was the table that was missing. I mean, they could have all eaten pizza as long as they were sitting around the table. And there's a Lyonnais respect for the table, which is probably why I do regard Lyon as a great eating city. Yes, they've got very high, some grand chefs, and yes, they got the really basic cooking. But finally, there is just an absolute respect for the table. And that's what the boys were missing. And when Frederick said it, he said, I don't know what that was, but that wasn't dinner.
I just love the descriptions of what the boys ate in their nursery school, and the way that they were taught so properly to manners and about nutrition and about balancing an entire meal.
It was really fabulous. There was an article recently in the New York Times about the fact that Lyon was not serving meat.
Yes.
And it was a very nicely written piece. The picture of what a Lyonnais canteen looks like was our boys' canteen.
Really?
Okay,
that's funny.
The boys looked at it, they go, oh yeah, that's the canteen. They go, it looks nicer.
What did they think about that what did they think about the whole not serving meat? What was their take as, I
mean, I think our whole family's take was is not a big deal because what they do is they serve 3 courses every day. They are rarely repeated. They will have a vegetarian offering and a meat offering. All of it's organic. They will have dairy and not dairy. It's the most complicated, sophisticated menu you can imagine for children. And of course, everything has a sauce because it is French. And everything really does have a sauce. I took so many pictures of the menu because they posted the menu at the beginning of the week, what they're going to eat. Because I thought, this is astonishing. And so for them, it wasn't a big deal. It's what they have that offering already. It's ridiculously sophisticated. And it's COVID. What they were more astonished by is that the children were actually indoors in the canteen eating during a COVID time, which I have to admit was a little surprising because Lyon's got hit very hard by the pandemic. But it was an education in eating, to such an extent that for the longest time, I mean, it was only a year ago. No, more than that. It must have been maybe a year and a half ago that Frederick said, excuse me if I'm being rude, but, and I don't mean to be rude, but when I was serving dinner, he said, is there a sauce? Because his assumption is that especially for cooking, there's always going to be a sauce.
Did you take that with you? Do you feel like now when you make a dinner, not just for your family, but like and I mean, obviously not now, but when you have dinner parties again, do you feel like you must have a sauce? Is that internalized at this point or no?
Oh, then when I cook at home, I make a sauce. If I
Really?
don't,
Even if you're just, wow.
yeah. But I'm into sauces now, and so and sauces can really be they can be really quite simple. They got a little more complicated now because Frederick doesn't eat dairy anymore, and it's a very easy trick if you're making a sauce to be able to add butter or cream.
Yep.
If you don't do that, then your usually flavors have to be a little more intense. I was just going through some notes just now, and I made I never remember what I do, but I made notes of some sauce that I made, I guess for chicken, where I mean, it must have been pork, where I did like kind of apple variations, and I did reduce chicken stock, reduce apple cider, throw in some Calvados, throw in a couple of things, then reduce it down, and then add a splash of something else at the end to give it a little acidity, fruit, feeling of meat.
Yep.
Yeah, I do sauces all the time.
All right, we got a couple of questions I'm going to get to the questions from our participants, but I really want to go back to something that you alluded to earlier. That's such a big part of your book, and this whole idea that the Italians invented French cuisine, or before there was a high French cuisine, there was this very fancy Italian cuisine. You mentioned Catherine de' Medici and the whole idea that she brought this court cuisine from Italy to France. But I want to just say this is anachronistic because there was no Italy and there was no France. And so talk about that a little bit, will you? Because we're talking about pre-nation states.
No, that is a fascinating idea. Because of course there wasn't, and yet there was. And there wasn't, and there was. I was trying to look up, there's the route that everybody took through the Alps that I traversed with the boys. And I was going to look up the sign, because the sign doesn't say this was the route that French soldiers took to fight the Italians or go into Italy. But there's a way of describing it. I think at one point in the book, I might have cut it. I describe it as the place that became Italy, or the Italian peninsula, or the peninsula that became Italy. I certainly skimmed deliberately in ways that there was this Italian thing in the 15th century and the 16th century that was so important that it would influence French cooking in the 17th century, and that seems so distant and removed and far-fetched that it would actually make any difference to what people are eating now, but I believe that it does. More interesting to me is, and it's in the same theme, is it is really, even now, when you get outside of the cities, the relationship to France and Italy is really amorphous. It's a shame that France imposed this sense of Frenchness on the nation so that everybody had the same language and the same kind of culture. It's as brutal as what Spain did to all its sort of local cultures, but it was much more efficient. But when you go along the edges, it's fascinating. I remember with a friend, Morgan Entrican, we went to buy some wine, and we went up into the mountains. They have a place in the south. And we went up into the mountains, and the owner wasn't there, but there was a guy who was there who works there, and I can understand him because he was speaking basically Italian.
Yeah,
Italian with a French accent. Or Daniel Boulud's father, Julien. I remember him saying, when he was a boy, he remembers his uncles speaking a patois that was Italian, which he didn't know at the time. But then in the progrès, he said he saw these Italian words, and he said, "Oh, I know these words because this is what my family spoke." There's a much more, and I remember when I was at Lac de Bourget. This is where I meet the guy who has the flower that I end up pursuing related. But I went there to go out with the fishermen, and I was spending a couple of days with the fishermen. They also speak a patois, and that wasn't Italian, but it wasn't French. It's a much more amorphous culture, and just like the people in Savoie resent the fact that they're part of France, because they were joined to France at the same time that Italy became one nation. It's all very recent. It's only 150 years ago. And
Well, I mean, if you think about Alsace, I mean, you think about, World War I and World War II. I mean, like so much of it. I think, there's so much flux going on, and just the idea, and then so you have like, you have these amorphous countries that don't really have borders, right? So there's like, you're talking about the edges, and there's overflow, and there's dialects in the Alps, and there's exchange of ideas, and there's no borders between countries. But what you do have is you have courts, right? So you definitely have the court of where was Catherine de Medici? Was she court of Milan, or was she Bologna? Where was she?
She was Tuscan.
Tuscan, right? Okay, so she was Tuscan. So she was Florence, right? Of course, Florence, obviously, yes, yeah. So and then you had the French court. So you had this court cuisine, which is where the higher flown ideas are going back and forth, which you talk about in your book. But then you also talk about the simpler, more rustic food eaten by people who live like in the Alps, and the exchange of ideas is going on so many different levels.
Yeah.
And I love that you really get into that in this book. I mean, what were there things about that really surprised you?
I was surprised actually how prominent the Italian influence was in Lyon. And that's because the other system of patronage and the other court was the bank. And the Medicis, or the rivals to the Medicis, set up basically a little Tuscany in Lyon and introduced currency exchanges and banking to the French. And they left behind this beautiful Italian Renaissance dwelling right in the middle of Lyon, which is regarded now as the oldest intact Renaissance habitation in the world. It's beautiful, and they were present in a profound way. But I think most of the surprises were in those areas where the borders are fuzzy. Yeah. In the mountains of the Alps, one of their specialties is very Italian ravioli, beautifully made stuffed pasta, and the way that there's a kind of exchange about how you cure a pig, which comes straight from Italy. And you'll always know what your people did, the people next door to you did. Maybe you'll know what they learned from someone else, but you feel a kind of interlinking with all of it. And I remember going back to the pigs, because I get involved in the slaughter of a pig, but one of the guys was a real pig expert. He's wonderful, and he knew all about culatello, which is a great specialty of Emilia Romagna, and they're all just like Danielle's father knew about how they were doing pigs in the south of France and near Spain, and there's a great interchange of something which is both, as you say, kind of court culture and rustic farm culture. And the cooking of the rustic farm culture is, in many ways, is the most moving and the deepest.
I'm going to ask some questions from our participants today because they're such great questions. Okay, someone was asking, let's see. Okay, do you have go-to recipes from working in Italy and France? All right, I was going to ask, what are your go-to recipes, Italian and French, but also what are the ones that you know that you'll never ever make again? So I guess what's stuck and what is banished?
I don't think there's too many things that I would never make again. There's some things that they're pastry things that I didn't make often that I would like to go back to master. Italy, I mean, the main thing I got out of Italy was I can butcher a pig, and I'm pretty good at butchering the leg of a cow. But mainly, what I learned and came to love was making pasta. And it's not really sophisticated, but once you've got it, you got a feel for what your dough should be like, and how you can manipulate it with egg yolks or this or that. I regard that as like it's a strength, is handmade pasta. In France, it's preparations. I mean, the biggest one is sauces. I've become I do cook sauces all the time.
Do you have a sauce that you just is like your, okay, this is my go-to sauce? Go-to sauce for fish. Let's narrow it down.
For
For
fish?
I'm just narrowing it down, but you can change it. You can do whatever go-to sauce you want.
Oh, fish would be very simple. I mean, ideally, fish stock, which is very hard to come by in New York because it's very hard to come by the fish bones unless you buy the whole fish. And at the markets, they're not allowed to gut the fish there, so it's hard to get fish bones. But I would do something with, I'd do something acidic, bright. I do a lot of stuff with vinegar. That's one of the things I came away with was an appreciation for vinegar and white wine, and then probably the fat from the fish. I would think that would keep that quite simple. There's some nice things where when you poach the fish in a wine and stock broth, that you can then reduce that poaching liquid down to make a sauce. I do like a béarnaise sauce with certain kinds of fish. I like béarnaise with a turbot, if you're lucky enough ever to get a turbot. Probably the most agile food for me in a French way is duck, because there's all these different things you can do with duck, and it yields so much flavor and fat and goodness. And so I can remember my stepbrother gave me a Christmas gift of 6 ducks from D'Artagnan. And so I invited a whole bunch of people over and then just did all the different preparations of the duck, and did the breast and did the sauce with the breast and did the confit. And then the most successful was one where I just slow roasted it for like 10 hours. And but that illustrates all the things you can do with duck. And duck is really good with sauce. Lots of sauce.
Have you ever used a duck press?
Yes. For a time, I was trying to buy one. I worked with Danielle a little bit, and we did this is the dish where you cook the duck quite rare, and that's basically flatters the breast. So the dish is basically the breast, and you remove the breast, and then you press everything else through the press, and it's basically getting blood, and the blood becomes the foundation of the sauce.
With all the organs.
And blood.
Because you need the liver and you need all the.
Yeah. It would be too graphic if I tell you how they're really made. The ducks, at least when in France, is that they're suffocated, so that the blood goes throughout the entire creature, and then when you press, you get the blood. Blood, I should also mention, is a great ingredient in a sauce, but it's very tricky. It's because it's like making a custard. You have to take it. You have to take it to the point right before it's going to break up, because that means it gets cooked and is at its best. But you go just a little bit too far, and you've ruined the whole thing.
Right, because blood wants to coagulate, because that is its nature. So you need to get it. You got to work with that. Okay, we have a really great question from Nancy. So there you are, wanting to work in French kitchens after your stint in at Babo. How did these French chefs perceive you? Do they, they're you're a food writer, obviously. You're not what did they think of you? Did they, let's see, do they think of you as like a wannabe? Do they think of you as like, what do they think?
Well, in the beginning, I was fairly confident. I had a couple introductions. Michel Richard introduced me to the chef of a restaurant called Lyon de Lyon. And Jean-Georges introduced me to Marc Ferrat. The trouble about Marc Ferrat is that he wasn't in Lyon, and he would have taken, Marc Ferrat is the madman in the Alps. And it's like, for someone who wants to write about this stuff, is like pure copy. He's like insane. But it didn't work out for many reasons. One of which is that he closed his restaurant. The other place didn't work out because Jessica and I went there and we loathed it. And ended up going to Lyon without a sure place to work, and was fairly confident I was going to find something, but nobody was prepared to take me on. And so they regarded me basically the fact that I was a writer, that I'd written books, that didn't make any difference. And it was only it was the reason why I went to cooking school. Once I did some cooking school, then I was taken on, and then I was regarded as a member of the kitchen. The virtue of the restaurant I went to, which was La Mer Brazier, was that it had just been reopened. It was financially a very tricky moment. They didn't want to hire more people. And after I'd been there about a month, my virtue was that I was free labor. And I was used as free labor. And there was one night, kind of slow night, it was a summer evening. There wasn't much going on. I wasn't cooking on the line yet. I was like pot peas or flicking asparagus bits. And I asked if I could go home early. And I said, and as Mathieu Vianney, the chef, said, no, you can't go. What happens if something happens? No, you can't go. And I realized, all right, I'm there. I mean, it's for a writer, it's kind of the perfect thing. I'm a cook.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do you feel like you are now a cook? And I mean, obviously you're a writer and that is your career and that is what you do, but do you also feel like you are legit? Like you are a cook legit?
Not quite.
Okay.
I could say I'm French trained.
Okay.
I had one opportunity, which for different reasons, it didn't come about, where I was going to work as a chef in our favorite bouchon de fille. And bouchon de fille, it's a bouchon is a Lyonnais small, informal, bistro-like restaurant. And it was used to have a mère, a woman in the kitchen, and this was the fille, the daughters, and they ran it so that they were not in the kitchen. They were the people out in the front. They were the money people, and they usually put a man in the kitchen, and then they just treated them just with utter contempt and abuse. And I thought, this is where I'll work. And they are friends, and I've cooked for them, and they have an enlarged respect for me, which is undeserved. But I was going to work there as a chef. Very simple operation, but if you're the chef,
yeah,
the fate of the evening is in your hands, and it's not knowing how to cook a dish. It's not knowing how to like read a ticket and get through the whole protocol. It's everything.
Yeah.
I'm thinking I still might go back to Lyon and do that gig. Partly because if you've been a chef, then you're in a different spot. I'm a cook. I'm a French trained cook. That's what I am, and I can go into a French kitchen and hold my own, and I can recognize what's going on. There was a time when I did a little bit of a book with Daniel Boulou, and I was in Lyon, and he was doing Lyonnais dishes in his kitchen, and I flew over, and America was really strange, and English came out of people's mouths, and it was kind of exciting and weird and easy to understand. Everything felt easy. And I went into the kitchen there, and I was really at home, really comfortable, knew what to do, just was very comfortable with the French and the whole French approach. So I've achieved that, whatever that is. But not a chef yet.
Let's talk about, you mentioned duck before, and I want to talk about the evolution of your duck pie. And I'd love you to tell the story of that, but then also, leading into the question of when is a recipe your own? You kind of discuss that in your book.
This is quite to the heart of a Melissa Clark kind of theme. You who are so gifted. Well, no, you're so gifted at coming up with preparations which are yours. I have a much more conservative approach. I think I try to. Well, there's a great idea. There's Alan Chappell wrote, one of the chefs from the region, wrote a book called I forget the name of the book, but the basic idea is cooking is more than its recipes, and the idea is that you don't learn a dish by its recipe. The recipe is just an introduction to the dish, and you get to know the dish the more you practice it. I think they're going to be applied to just about anything, especially if you're wanting to fuss with it or make it better, or you're dealing with a son who has a dairy issue, or you want to make your tacos more savory or have more punch. And when you get into a complicated dish, it becomes a kind of it becomes a dialogue with your food. And I experienced this with making this dish. It was a competition dish, and I didn't do the competition. So a lot of people, my friends, did the competition. They all failed, but I used my journalistic credentials to sit on the judging of the competition, which is probably much better. And as a result, I then started making the dish, and it was canard au cidre. It was duck with apple cider. And the idea is that you take a duck and you remove the breasts, and you cook the breasts separately, and you make a cider sauce that goes with them. And then you take the rest of the duck and you put it in a tart with mushrooms, turnips, the duck, some apple components. There's something else that I'm not remembering, and you can do it in a puff pastry. So you're taking a duck and you're doing it two ways, and then you serve it with this little slice of the breast, and then this delicious cider sauce, and then you have a slice of pie, or what we call tort, really. And I did that dish, I don't know, 20, 30 times, and I got kind of deeper and deeper and deeper into it. And in the end, I did introduce variations, and I was pretty pleased with it. I did introduce a couple things. I did, like, you know, I made a ragu in the realizing that was a French word, and that introduced me the whole other thing about, like, where does the ragu come from? But it just got, you know, I introduced some olives. I admit, I introduced I cooked the duck in pig stomach so it glisten and become richer. I discovered turnips. It was such a revelation to discover turnips. And I cooked turnips and a little bit of this cider duck jus, and constructed a really proud of. And eventually I'll make it for you.
Yes, please. That's what this whole thing was about, by the way. That whole question was just you getting me to get you to publicly invite me over for duck pie. But at the end of that, you tell this duck pie anecdote about how you change it and what is the nature of a recipe. But then at the end, you really do say straight out in the book, this recipe is now mine. And I guess,
yeah, that's true. True. For the competition, they set out very specific things, and I did start deviating from them, and deviating them in ways which made the dish more satisfying to me. So the deviations were governed by my palate and what I wanted to eat. Yeah. But in the end, it's true. I forgot that. I did feel that this dish is mine. It's got this, I took the cider thing, I reduced the cider way down. I started adding Calvados. I started doing stuff with quince. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I went. Yours. But it is mine. Yes, that's true. It's a little laborious, but it is mine.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. If anyone has it, please write it in. Otherwise, I have one, but I would love to hear. I know Bill would love to hear from you all. So, anyone else has a question? Otherwise, I'm going to ask you, Bill. So this is something that struck me. And I think this is actually really telling about the book. Oh, wait, someone does have a question. All right. And then I can ask you my question another time, which is just about cover design, this design for the hardcover versus the paperback, which are very different in feel. But this is a great question from Robin Schwartz, which is, would you consider, they're really different. They feel different. But I think this is a great question. Would you consider going to another country? Are you going to Spain next? Are you going to China? Where are you going next to learn how to cook? What is your next, or are you?
I don't know. I mean, I think wanting to go to France really arose out of the wonderful experience of going to Italy. Partly because they are kind of culinary cousins, and for all the reasons that we discussed before. I have found myself, when I had a kind of early romantic fascination with Spain. I used to play Spanish guitar, and then I learned Spanish, and then I went to England. But the first chance I had, I went to Spain, and it was like, I'm old, so it wasn't the year after Franco died, but it was about 2 years after Franco died, and it was a really turbulent place. And I fell kind of in love. I went to Galicia. I kind of fell in love with Galicia, and I've been hankering to go. And I used to get fish that they'd throw out on the dock when they came in with it, and then I'd grill it out in the rocks. And I was by myself. It was just a very intense experience. So I've been thinking about Spain.
All right, that would be thrilling for all of us to read about that. Okay, I lied. This is really the last question because someone had asked it before and I missed it. Are there 2 ingredients that you cannot live without? And then I promise we'll let you go and finish your wine.
I'm doing a very good job myself, actually. The 2 ingredients that I learned not to live without living in France were pepper. And pepper is really, really big in French cooking. And the guy who introduced pepper to the French, Monsieur Poivre, there's a street named after him, right, just like on the other side of the square where we lived. And the other is vinegar. I now can't believe that I was cooking without vinegar so often. Whereas now I realize the acidity is what kind of makes a dish work, and it makes a sauce work. Yeah. So whatever your sauce is, if you work with vinegar, then you start to create a kind of balance. And I probably have like 20 different vinegars, and I'm using them all the time. I love vinegar. All
right.
Also, my children love vinegar, because I remember when I did cook with vinegar before we went to France, they'd come into the kitchen and they go, "Ew, what's that smell?" And now they come into the kitchen and they're like, I smell vinegar. Are you cooking?
Because they know that if they smell vinegar, good things are going to come on the table. Everybody, if you have not bought a copy of Bill's fantastic book, you can get it in hardcover or paperback. It's really a great read. Bill, you're the best.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you.
That was amazing. If everybody wants to unmute and clap for Melissa and Bill for that wonderful, wonderful hour where I think only the thing that could be better is if we were all having dinner together afterwards. So y'all were so generous with your time. And the great thing is that you can read Bill's amazing, enlightening, hysterical, nail-biting, and entertaining book. And you can get Melissa's great book too. So there's no way you won't have a great weekend with these 2. Happy to kick it off.
You also can borrow it from the library.
Oh, yes.
And borrow from the library. Absolutely. There we go.
Okay.
Thank y'all for being part of Food Lit Book Club with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa.
It was such a delicious event. That was fantastic.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you. And Melissa, you're going to get an invitation for some duck pie very soon.
Lovely.
I'm waiting.
Thank y'all so much. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.